everybody. Jeff Jones here. Welcome to the weekly Chase Oaks Church podcast. Before we dive in, I want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and download the Chase Oaks Church app. The app is the best place to catch up on messages, engage with our community, and stay in the loop with everything going on around here. Most importantly, my hope is that today's message inspires you to take your next step in your faith journey. Here we go.
I think it's done. It's good to see you guys. How are you all doing? Welcome to Chase Oaks Church. Man, you guys are so kind. Thank you, Mom, wherever you are out there. It's good to have you. Hey, it is so great to be with you wherever you're joining us from as we are in week 2 of our series called Navigating Us, where we're talking about finding the kind of connection we want in a changing world, which can be so difficult. And each week of this series, Jeff introed us last week, but moving forward, we're gonna be focusing on a particular type of relationship and the unique challenges that are in that type of relationship, whether it's marriage as a spouse or parenting, or whether it's you to your parents, or as a neighbor, or in this week's case, as a friend. I think we would all say that in this world, there are unique challenges with each of those types of relationships and how we navigate this, and it's only getting trickier. There was a recent study that was done by the Survey for American Life where they did a survey on friendship. And they found that about 5 out of 10 men, and it was a little bit less satisfied for women, about 4 out of 10 women reported being satisfied in their friendships. But I don't think we need research to tell us this. I think we know from experience that friendship is challenging depending on your story or depending on the season of life that you're in. It's tricky, and it's only getting trickier. And to set us up for this, I want to share with you about a story, a recent navigational challenge we ran into, because I think it'll set us up for today. And so about a month ago, our family decided to do our first extended road trip as a family. We took a 10.5-hour drive, a road trip to the beaches of Alabama. Now, for you, many of you guys have done longer trips with more kids and younger kids. But for me, I have 3 young kids, the youngest being a 5.5-year-old, also known as the wild card of the scenario. And so I was a little bit hesitant, but I've been inspired by your courage. You guys, I just saw all the pictures like, we can do this, Amy, I know we can do it. So we packed all the kids in the car and we set out on our trip to Fort Morgan, Alabama. And the kids did great, by the way. The kids did awesome. But part of the challenge of it was we had to pick a route to go. You know, there's different ways to go. You could go kind of up on the north, but we chose to go on the south route because it was the fastest route, but it also involved an X factor. It had a ferry at the end of the route. In fact, we have a map. I think it helps to visually see this just so you can see what we're talking about. So you go the south route there, and it is a way to avoid Mobile, Alabama. You got that huge bay that's there, and then you go down through on bridges to Dauphin Island, and then there's a ferry. It's about an 8-mile channel that cuts off the mouth of the bay and saves about 45 minutes of journey time on the trip. And so you guys can pull that down. I mean, that's not the most exciting thing in the world. You get the idea. So we were going south, and we were like, okay, we did our research ahead of time, because I'm not that foolish in there. I said, okay, you know, ferries can be a little unpredictable, but it does save 45 minutes of time. The ferry runs every 45 minutes. So if we miss one, it's no big deal. We'll just kind of hang around, you know, stretch our legs, and it'll be a great way to end the trip. And so we're driving on this route, we're, you know, plowing away, and I'm really proud of the Google Maps time that's up there, and it's saying we're gonna arrive at 3:30 in the afternoon on Dauphin Island. And there happens to be a ferry that's gonna leave at exactly that time. And so looking back, I was so naive. I was just so naive. But in my head, I had this image where we're gonna pull up right at 3:30, you know, and the ferry captain's gonna tip his cap at us. You know, and we're gonna pay him the toll, and we'll get onto the ferry, and then we'll go through it, and we'll be at our condo at latest at 4:30 in the afternoon. But as we're driving onto Dauphin Island, I noticed that there's a lot of traffic, you know, because it's a Saturday at the beach in July, you know? And so there's a lot of traffic, but we're still making it right to the point, and then we see this long line that is kind of piled up, and we kind of pull in it, and this person's selling ferry tickets, and she says, hey, do you want a ticket on our next available ferry at 6:30 in the evening? That was 3 hours later. And I could literally see the destination ahead. Like you just look across the channel and there was where we needed to be. And yet I was like, you know what? Because there's a kicker in this too. I have to give this part of the story because it just makes it make even worse. That for you to be on the ferry, you actually had to leave your car in the line the entire time. Like there was no reservation, here's your ticket, and you can come back whenever you want. And so with 3 young kids, after a 10-hour car drive, I'm like, I am not waiting in line for 3 hours to get on a ferry. So I immediately ditch out and kind of start pulling back, and I'm like, okay, in my head, this is at most gonna be an hour. You know, like it's around the thing. And then this is what Google Maps pops up, is the detour that we had to take. And I don't know if you can see it, 2 hours and 16 minutes and 107 miles. That's 2 hours and 16 minutes around the bay, through Mobile, through pure beach traffic, when I could literally have seen the destination that we wanted to get to the whole time. Why do I bring this up today? Partly it's therapeutic, so thank you for letting me process together. It's so helpful. This is like free therapy. It's one of the benefits of being a pastor. But the other reason why I bring this up, and it's what I want to talk about for a few minutes today, is that it's an example of how their life is full of so close yet so far moments, where it seems like everything is just kind of humming and clicking along, and it's like, okay, everything's going, there's momentum, and then we hit a snag and suddenly feel further away than we ever thought that we were planning on being. And it's harder that second time to work up the energy because of how close we thought we were in the moment. And I think in particular, this relates to friendship. Like sometimes we've had the times when you think of your friends or maybe a close friend and there was a relationship that was growing and it was getting better. And then all of a sudden that friend moves. Or we're the one that moves or graduates or goes to a new city to pursue a job. And it's like, oh man, I've got to start all over again. Or maybe it's not the location that changes, it's the season that changes. You know, where somebody gets married or somebody has kids and becomes a parent. And kids, we love you, but you change things. Like all of a sudden, poker nights turn into late night feeding kind of scenarios. And it's in those moments when the season changes that friendship typically changes too, and we have to work up the energy again. Or maybe it's you've been building up trust in a relationship with someone and you felt like you were at a certain point and it felt like things were just so tight, so close, and then that person betrays the trust in our life and it's heartbreaking and painful. Or maybe it's rejection, where we thought, hey, I think this is somebody that I can be close friends with, and we start to develop a friendship and then we maybe get vulnerable with them and it's not reciprocated. Life is full of rejection kind of moments. You know, it's interesting. I was listening to a podcast by a guy named David Brooks. He wrote a great book called How to Know a Person. And on this podcast, he shared that he thinks we live in the most rejected period of time ever. And what he means by that is he's like, he grew up in he's 60 years old or in the 60s period of time. And so for him, it was a lot easier to get into college. And so he was reflecting on that. It's like, hey, for me, you know, you send out a few applications and you get mostly acceptances back. But today, most of us are facing rejection or finding a job where we're sending out lots and lots of applications. And most of the time it's rejections that come back, or social media or online dating. And I think we bring all of that into our friendships, where if we're not careful, friendships can start to feel rather fragile. And we keep people kind of at an arm's length, not because we don't want the depth that comes with going deeper, but it's just that we're tired and even possibly discouraged. Like we're going to the ferry and we got rejected and we have to figure out how to work up the energy to do it again. And that could be a lot harder than we thought. And so today, before we get too far into this, I think it's just helpful for you and I to kind of be honest about where we're at. Like, okay, depending on where you're at in your season or your life stage, what is it that makes friendship a struggle right now? And just bring that to mind. Is it about having young kids, or you recently moved, or whatever it is? Just have that in your head. Or what is it about your story? Maybe it's past hurts or past rejections or just things that you're carrying with you that make it hard to move forward in your friendship journey. And I think my goal today is not to dismiss any of that in your journey, But what I do think that happens with it, that we have to be honest about, is that those things, in light of it, can make us kind of feel like friendship is something we luck into. Almost like it's a roll of the dice, or, man, I hope this happens in my world, and we feel a little out of control. And the truth of the matter is in life, there are a lot of things that are outside of our control, but not everything. And I would like to argue that when it comes to friendship, I think we're in more control than we often think. I think there are things that people that have deep friendships at multiple seasons of their life, there are things that these people do and keep doing throughout that you and I can actually start doing as well, even today. And so to highlight those things, I want to look at a story from the Bible. It's from 605 BC. So this is an Old Testament, 2,600 years ago kind of story, but we're going to see a powerful example of friendship that I think you and I can draw inspiration from. And to do that, I want you to turn to Daniel chapter 1, and the text is actually going to set up the context and the backstory of this friend group that we'll see. And so this is what it says. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. He attacked it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off into the temple of his God in Babylonia and put them in the treasure house of his God. Now, quick history lesson. Nebuchadnezzar is a king that many of us read about in our history books. He started what was one of the largest empires in the ancient Near East, the Babylonian Empire. And Babylon, the capital city of this empire, was in what is now modern-day Iraq. Fun fact for you that you can look up on ChatGPT or Google after the service. It's really interesting. Saddam Hussein, who was a dictator of Iraq for many years, actually modeled himself after Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted, almost in a creepy way, to be Nebuchadnezzar. Like, he would put his images up on different murals and next to Nebuchadnezzar's. They would do coins that were the same. He actually tried to rebuild modern day Babylon. It was kind of crazy and really weird. But the real Nebuchadnezzar from 605 BC, he was expanding his empire and he wanted to attack Jerusalem. He wanted to take over and expand. The text lets us know in this case that actually God is still the one that's in control, that God actually is the one that allowed it. The Old Testament history lesson for a second, that God has his people, the people of Israel. He loves them dearly, and yet they oftentimes pursue other idols, pursue other things, and God's like, hey, I love you, and I'm not gonna forsake you, but sin has consequences to it. It always has consequences to it, and so one of those consequences was that people started to go into exile, and he allowed other countries to conquer them, and that included Nebuchadnezzar. So continuing on. So because Nebuchadnezzar would sack a city, he not only would take stuff out of the temple, he would take people as well. This is what it says continuing on. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, ordered Ashpenaz, that's a fun name to say, Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. Now, real quick, Nebuchadnezzar had a shrewd strategy when he would go and conquer a people group. That instead of going in and enslaving everybody or destroying everything, he would actually take captive the best and the brightest, the prettiest, and the most powerful. Harvard meets Hollywood. He would gather all of them in there and he would take them captive. And it wasn't to torture them or anything. He actually would do something specific with them. This is what it says. He, the chief court official, this is what Nebuchadnezzar wanted him to do, was to teach them, the captives, the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Basically, what they would tell these guys is like, we want to give you a 3-year, all expenses paid, free tuition, room and board included, and we're not talking dorm room food here. We're talking food that would come directly off of the king's table, like the best stuff that you can imagine. And I want us to put ourselves in the mindset of the people that this was happening to. Because obviously nobody would want to be taken captive, like that was in no one's plans. But imagine you had been taken captive and you're on this journey to a strange land, and suddenly you find out that you are going to be invited into the palace. And you're going to be put into this program that will train you and feed you. You'll be surrounded by some of the prettiest people in the whole area. You'll be the most powerful. A lot of them had thought that they were probably going to wind up like lugging like dirt and boulders and stuff up hills the rest of their life and wasting away. They must have thought that they were going to win the lottery, but instead they got into this program. But it came with a catch. And the catch was that they would slowly strip away their identity bit by bit, piece by piece. It was actually a really brilliant thing that Nebuchadnezzar wanted to do, because he would say, hey, I could control people and make them pro-Babylonian. And so whether they stay in my city for the rest of their life, or maybe they go home, they're going to be, singing our praises as a group. And it's easier to control. And so it's in that context that we meet our friend group here in verse 6. And it says this: among those chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. Now, this was a group of friends that had made the gifted and talented program. They were the best and the brightest. They were in there. And the acculturation process with this friend group that we meet has already begun. Like, we find out that Daniel's name is already in the process of being changed. They was changing it to Belteshazzar, which was probably a reference to one of the Babylonian gods. There was a god named Bel. And so the name probably means something like Bel will take care of you, or Bel is your provider. Not exactly in our top 10 names list right now. If you're here last week, Jeff was trying to get Jeff back in the top 10 names of babies. Good luck with that, Jeff, but he's trying. But I don't think Belteshazzar is going to make the cut anytime soon. You probably recognize the other people that were listed in there too, that we had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If you were anybody that grew up in Sunday school, these were famous names that you probably sang songs about. In my household, VeggieTales is a big thing right now, so we have Rack, Shack, and Benny are part of our curriculum that's going on there. But this was a famous group of friends, and I'm betting that none of these guys liked having their names changed. I'm betting none of them actually fully accepted it in the moment either. Yet the text tells us that they don't really seem to fight it either. They don't really seem to put up a big stink about like, oh, you can't change my name. Which is interesting to me, because I think in this moment what these guys are trying to do, much like we are today, is trying to navigate a tricky cultural situation. And they simply made up their minds that there were some things that they were just not going to worry about all that much. And yet there were also some things that they decided, you know what? This is a big deal. And this is one of them. This is the next verse, Daniel chapter 8. But Daniel resolved. That's a great phrase. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. There's some theories about, well, why did Daniel choose not to eat the food and the wine? Like, why did he think that this would defile him? Like, some people think maybe Daniel knew that this food and wine had been offered to some of the gods that were there, and he was like, hey, I'm just not comfortable with taking that food. Maybe this food would keep him from being able to keep the diet that the Old Testament prescribed for the Jewish people to stay kosher. That's a restriction that they had. It's not a restriction that you and I have today. My personal theory is that I think Daniel wanted to show that it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar that was in control. It wasn't this training program that was in control. It wasn't the Babylonian Empire that was in control. It was God that was in control. And he wanted to put a stake in the ground to say, okay, I'm going to make a statement. This is as far as I'm going to go. And I want to show you how God is going to show up in a big way. But whatever the reason was, this was the reason he put a stake in the ground. He said, I am not crossing this particular line. And I want you, in this next passage we're going to read, I want you to notice, because this is where his friends start to show up. Because he kind of makes a statement on behalf of his friends that when he resolves, they resolve too. Check this out. Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, he said, please test your servants for 10 days. He's asking for a test because the guards are like, man, if you guys don't eat, you're gonna look bad, and that's gonna look bad on us, and we don't want that to happen. And so this is where Daniel's like, well, hey, just put us to the test and see what God does. But again, look what it says. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. That this friend group is so aligned and is so tight that Daniel knows that if he makes a resolution, they're gonna be there right with him. That there's no, like, it's almost like, hey, if you mess with one of us, you're messing with all of us. I don't know, and this is gonna show how unspiritual I am, but the first image that popped into my mind when they're taking this resolution is this image. It's kind of like, that's the Backstreet Boys for you younger people out there that haven't really paid attention, but it's almost like you got this group and they're like, yeah, we're locked arms, what are you gonna do? Okay, they probably look a lot different, hopefully, than that, because that's not super tough, and they weren't actually super close, I don't think, in real life. But it shows that this group was so connected with each other, had been so tight, that they knew that if one of them was taking a step, they were in this together. And not only are they in it together, God was in it with them too, and this is what happens. So he agreed, the court official agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Basically, hey, do your thing, honor your God. Like, obviously you guys are right. And to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. That this was a special group of friends for lots of reasons. Like, obviously, there was something miraculous that happened here in this moment, that God showed up, and God would continue to show up in the lives of these 4 guys. I mean, after what God had done and how healthy they looked and all the knowledge that they had possessed, that Nebuchadnezzar would appoint these guys to be, in big positions of authority and leadership, only to then get frustrated with these guys when they wouldn't follow all the traditions and honor all of their gods. And there's even a famous story that some of us are aware of where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into a fiery furnace because they wouldn't worship Nebuchadnezzar. And in that moment, God does miraculously show up. But even then, I love the phrase that these guys said before they were about to be thrown into the furnace, because it shows their resolve as a friendship group. Where they say to Nebuchadnezzar, it's like, hey, we believe that if you throw us into that furnace, that God will save us, but even if he doesn't, we will still not worship you because we worship God alone. That's resolve. And it was a resolve that they had together. And I don't know about you, but when I look at this friend group and I see kind of the way that they show up in a tricky cultural situation, it's like, I want that in my life. Like, not the cultural, acculturation stuff, not the fiery furnace stuff. I don't want that, but I do want the closeness of what these guys seem to figure out amongst themselves. And I bet you do too. And so it begs a question that we need to answer. And it's a tricky question to answer. And it's, well, how did they get so close? Like, what did it take? And the text doesn't really tell us completely. Like, we have to kind of take some clues and hints and maybe speculate a little bit. What we see here in Daniel 1 is we see the end product. We don't see the process, but we can take some guesses. And so let's do that a little bit together. We know that these guys were young at the time that they were taken, that they were between 13 and 17 years old is what young men probably would have been in the phrasing of Daniel chapter 1. So we knew they were young. We knew that they were part of the best and the brightest, that these guys, they were the cream of the crop. And so my speculation, it's just a theory, I don't know if this is true or not, but I tend to think that these guys started off as rivals. That they were, say they were in high school and they're competing for the same position, they all want to be the quarterback or the valedictorian, or they all want the same girl. I don't know, but I just feel like they were rivals that were competing with each other. Pure speculation, take that or leave that with what you want. But we know at some point when they were in that age and things seemed to be clicking and humming, that all of a sudden they were taken captive. And they had to go on a long, difficult journey, a journey that they hadn't planned on. In fact, because I love maps so much today, I'm gonna show you another map that we have of the journey that they had to take. Let's pop it up there. This was a 1,000-mile journey that they had to walk, which likely would have taken somewhere between 4 and 5 months for them to do. And just for clarity's sake, this journey was not in their plans. Like, this was a detour, and detour is not a strong enough word because they had no plans, no hope at ever really even coming back. You guys can take the map down, by the way. Because with that detour, they were like, I don't know what's gonna happen on this journey. I'm being pulled away, and my thought is, and I believe it's just how we show up in Daniel 1, is that it was on this journey that bonded them in a way that they could never have predicted. That was in that moment. You know, you and I, we often look at other friend groups in our life and we want what they have without realizing all that they had to go through to get there. Like, one of my favorite shows that's on TV is Band of Brothers. You can watch it on Netflix right now. It's a gritty show, so I wouldn't do it with young kids, but it tells the true story of Easy Company. It was a group of soldiers that served together during World War II in Europe. And in the show, and this was a true story, so again, this was one of the soldiers' observations. He said he was in Easy Company. He's like, why is it that Easy Company is always the first one that has to go into a fight? Like, they were always leading the charge on the way into an enemy city. Or why is it that Easy Company is the one that's always on the front of the line, you know, if they're advancing or if they're trying to hold the enemy back? Or why was it that Easy is always the one that's dropped in the area that's surrounded by the most people? And the truth was, they were the ones that were always out front or surrounded the most or the first ones in. And yet, as biographers have looked back at them and talked to each of those guys, they've remarked how Easy Company had an unusual bond of connection, even for soldiers. And it was based on everything that they had been through together, because it's a powerful bonding thing. Some of us are waiting for the perfect season for friendship. And I think what Daniel would tell us is he would say there's no perfect season for friendship. In fact, it's often our imperfections, the things that are not great about our season, or even that are not great about our story, the hardships, the rejections, the being a new parent or moving to a new city. It's often those things that are most connective about us. And so my question for you is, what if something that seems like a detour or a difficulty to you today winds up leading to something that could be defining in your life, including a defining set of friendships? People who shape an entire season for us, or maybe even a season, longer than a season, entire journey. But with that, I think what Daniel discovered was that, yes, this detour did lead to some defining friendships, but it actually required some intentionality on his part. In fact, if I had a main point for tonight, and we'll dive into this for a second, it'd be this: that definitive friendships, the ones that shape us for a season, definitive friendships require definition. And this is where you and I have a lot of agency. We have a lot of control. Because each season, and I think it's something that we need to do each season, that if we want to find definitive people in our life, there are certain things that we need to do to bring clarity to the connections in our life. And let me explain what I mean in 3 distinct ways. The first one is that if we want definitive friendships, we need to have definitive values. We need to be able to define who it is that we are and who it is that we want to be. This is something that Daniel had clearly done as he was entering into Babylon, as he was on this detour of his life, and he knows he's entering into this strange area, that he had clearly pre-decided ahead of time, okay, this is how I want to journey through this season of my life. Even if I didn't plan on it, even if I didn't predict it, that there's some purpose for me, and I want to be intentional about who it is I want to be and what it is I want to say about myself at the end of this season. And so he had done this. And what I love about Daniel is he is one of the best examples we have in the entire Bible of faithful engagement, because he didn't just pull away or reject the culture. In fact, he's like, okay, I'm gonna do the hard work of defining what my values look like in a very difficult season, in a very difficult culture. The question is, well, what does that have to do with finding friendship? It has a lot to do with finding friendship. Aristotle, he's a philosopher who existed about 300 years after Daniel lived. Aristotle said that there were 3 different types of friendship that we can have in our life. There are utility friendships. These are ones that are based on usefulness. Think of like your work friendships, the people that, hey, you could do something for me, I could do something for you. There's connection in that. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's one type of friendship. There are friendships that are based on pleasure. Think of friends that you like doing stuff with, like hobbies and shared activities and shared interests. Again, nothing wrong with that. But what Aristotle found, what he argued, is that the most rare, but also the most stable and the most defining friendships in our life are values-based friendships. Friends where we share the same character goals that we have. Friends who are moving in the same direction, that those are the ones that are defining in our life. But it means that if you and I want to find values-based friendships, we actually have to know what our values are. And that culture would love to tell us what that is. Other people, this is actually the negative part of friendship, like negative peer pressure, would love to define these things for us. But I think if we were to take Daniel's lead from this, we would say, okay, before I'm entering into a season, let me be clear about who it is I'm trying to be. And then let me look for some people that are heading in the same direction so that I can join up with them. But it's not enough to actually know your values and actually see people that you want to connect with. We have to do something else. And that brings us to my second one, which is we need definitive conversations. Like Daniel and his buddies had clearly had some different discussions along the way about how together they were going to enter into this situation called Babylon. And I think it happened quite a bit, honestly. I don't think it was a one-time conversation. I bet over a 4 to 5 month journey, as you started to see people that you like, you're like, hey man, this is kind of crazy. Like, what are we gonna do with this? But we know that by the time that they got to Babylon, that they had had these conversations. The reason why I think we can know this is that when Daniel had that moment where he is telling the official about his resolve, he had known where his guys were at, that they had already had the conversation. There was no guy that was like, hey, you committed us to what? Like, you said no to the filet mignon so I can have just celery? Like, that's the deal you came away with? There was none of that confusion at all, because they had talked about it and defined this is what we're trying to do together. It reminds me back in college, I joined a Christian fraternity, which I know sounds like a bit of an oxymoron when I say that. In fact, I just got to be honest, like my first impression of it when I had heard that there was a Christian fraternity was, it felt like it was kind of cheesy at first. I was like, I don't know, that feels kind of lame. But I met some of the guys that were in it, and I was really intrigued by the way that they were living and kind of the closeness that they had. And so I made the decision to pledge for that fraternity, and it was the best decision I made in college, guaranteed. Because we had a bunch of guys that had committed to saying, hey, this is what we want college to look like. In fact, I was able to visit UCLA. That's where I went. Go Bruins. Any love? No? Hey, Troy Aikman went to UCLA. So if you're watching, okay, thank you. One person. I appreciate the love on that. It's no Texas A&M. Whoop, okay, thank you. But it's UCLA. So I was out at UCLA. We were revisiting a number of years later and went back up into the house because we had a house for this fraternity. And I was able to find my the old kind of photograph that had all of the people in the fraternity when I was there. So can we pop it up on screen? Because this was the group of guys. There's me in the far corner, like just so young and full of hope, not dashed by life or anything like that. And yet this was a powerful group of guys for me because not just were we friends, but we had made a decision. Like, it was a commitment and deep conversations with each other, because we had a pledge process where we're like, okay, this is what this means. And we lived together and we held each other accountable, because by the end of our time at college, we all had the same goal. And it was so definitive for me to have that group of guys. And so have you had a definitive conversation with the friends that are in your life? because it is so easy to skip this step. Small groups. Have you had a definitive conversation? Not just, hey, we're getting together every week or every 2 weeks in a home to read this study together. Have you had the conversation to say, what season are we in right now? And what are our goals? And what are we doing together? Because we're not here just to hang out. Like, that's great, and I love hanging out, but actually, I've got big plans and big goals, and this is a tricky culture, and I need this group or these people to help me with it. Would you be a values-based friend that would guide me and shape me, and we could grow together? Don't skip that step, because it's that step that brings clarity and definition to the friendships that are in our life. The final thing I want to highlight tonight, at least from a definitive definition standpoint, would be that defining friendships require definitive opportunities. Definitive opportunities. What is encouraging to me when I read Daniel 1 and I see Daniel's group is how open that they were to everything. I mean, think about it. I mean, if you were there, if I was there at that point, it would be so easy to have hunkered down and kind of go into full-on rejection mode. It's like, dude, this is so weird. You want to change my name? Like, I'm gonna get away and just kind of turn into sort of a huddle. And that's not what they did at all. In fact, they knew that God was up to something in that moment, and they didn't want to miss out. In fact, they wanted to meet God in the moment because they knew there was something that was in that season that they needed to embrace. And the result that happened is incredible, because a group of teenagers impacted an entire empire. We're still talking about them today, this friend group, because they rose up to meet the moment. You know, the best friend circles in life are not, they're not cliques. I think we know that from experience, particularly if we've ever been rejected by maybe an insider-focused clique. And yet it's so easy for us to actually unintentionally wind up in one where we wouldn't have even known it at this time, but we're like, man, this group has actually become kind of insider-focused. The best friend circles are actually outward facing. And it's strange, but it's actually that openness that brings that group closer together in a way that never would have happened without that openness that started with. You know, our cultural moment is different than it was for Daniel's. But we still have significant opportunities that are in front of us here that God has in our culture today. And we can either choose with our friend circles, with whatever connections you have, to either rise up and meet those, or we can kind of hold back and miss out on so much. And there's a lot of ones I can mention. I mean, even last week, Jeff talked about the power of a shared mission. We have a broad mission as a church, and that's a great thing to do. But I'd like to highlight a particular part of that mission, because I think there's a moment that we can embrace in particular as a church and as friend circles. It's what I mentioned at the beginning of this message, and that is that we live in the most rejected period of time ever. And you and I have the opportunity to think about the question of like, okay, what would it look like for us as a church, as friends, for us to meet that moment and meet it head on and do something about it? And this is personal to me because back in high school, I had somebody that did this for me. I had two somebodies that did this for me. It was how I have two of my closest friends today. Back in high school, my two friends, their names are Ash and Danny. They had been best friends before I got into their friend group. And honestly, they would have said the two of them were doing just fine on their own. Like they were connected and life was going great for them. But life was not going great for me. Like I was struggling with loneliness. I remember in that season, I was praying to God about it, and I had a solution for God to that problem. I said, God, would you please bring me a girlfriend? That was my solution that was in my head. And what God did is he answered the prayer by bringing me two dudes. And I said, God, you didn't understand the prayer. Like maybe I need to reword this prayer of exactly what it is that I'm looking for there. But you know what? God did understand the prayer. And he sent the right people. But it all hinged on these two guys. Like they would hang out a lot, and they drove around in this car. My buddy Ash, he drove around in a 1990 Geo Prism 2-door hatchback. Here's a picture of it. That is a classy ride right there. That's not his actual car. His looked a lot worse than that one, actually. And it was this car that they opened the door up to to invite me to a lunch that then turned into opening that door up to invite me into a youth group and a small group, and we would travel around all throughout Southern California in that car having conversations over and over again. And if you were to ask me, like, hey, would you have ever planned in your story that a geoprism would play a transformative part of it? I would have been shocked, and yet it did, because they opened that door. It is so easy, especially if some of us maybe have been journeying in friendship for a long time and we finally have a good thing going. Maybe this, like our small group is finally clicking together and it feels like everything's great. Or man, I finally found my two really great friends. It is so easy for us to hunker down. It is so easy for us to almost get a scarcity mentality where it's like, man, I don't necessarily want to let someone else in because it's going to ruin a good thing, or there's only so much friendship to go around and I don't want to lose out on what that would be. But I think there's actually a moment that you and I have with our friend groups to open whatever geoprism door that we have in our life, whether it's our home or a booth in a restaurant or simply our friend circle, that a simple invitation that may not seem like much to you and I on the front end could wind up being a defining moment, not just for the person that's being invited in, but actually for that friend circle. That in an age of rejection, we can actually have an opportunity to be a projection of the grace and love and open arms that Jesus has provided for each of us. That's our opportunity. And so as I close today, I think every season of our life is an opportunity for us to redefine what friendship looks like for us. That yes, there are unique challenges. Yes, there are unique obstacles. Yes, we're bringing some different stories and hurts into the process. And yet in this moment, God is up to something. He wants to connect people together because that's where life is. And so you and I have an opportunity. Maybe it's starting with just defining what friends you're looking for. Say, okay, based on my values, and I look at my friend circle right now that I have some changes to make. Maybe I need to actually invite some people in or kind of change the crowd I'm with to be able to go in the flow that I want to get to where I want to go. Or maybe it's having a definitive conversation with your small group or with a friend in your life. Say, hey, man, this has been great. I love hanging out, but I would love to take this to the next level. Or maybe it's not defining something, it's refining something. It's refining a friendship or refining a group, saying, hey, we've lost a little bit of our purpose. We've become a little cliquish. Can we open up a little bit? And so my closing thought for you is I'd love to steal a word from Daniel, where he said that Daniel resolved in his culture. I'd love for you to think of one friendship resolution, some way that you could show some relational resolve this week. And maybe it's putting yourself out there and joining a small group, joining an established group to find some friends. It's not easy, it's not comfortable, but you're like, okay, I'm gonna resolve to do that. Or maybe it's inviting someone in to something new. Whatever it is, let's bring this to God who will meet us in there and will define this season, defining friendship for our world. Let's pray together. And prayer is just an opportunity for us to connect to God. And so in this moment, I just take a moment to be honest with God about whatever relational struggles, whatever friendship struggles you're having. He understands. And as you share about that, just ask God to give you wisdom to say, God, would you help me to see what it is that you want me to do? Would you help me to find and refine the friendships in my life that you want me to have? Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to be inspired by a group of friends that changed an empire, and it's because they were open. But it's also because they showed resolve together. And Father, I pray for the friendships in this church, that this would be a friendly church, an open arms church, one where it's easy to connect and one where we are able to relate to each other in deep and meaningful ways. We love you, and it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.